Today's guest is Rick Allen with Informed Athletes, who has been dedicated since 2008 in helping student athletes play the sport they love and maximizing their eligibility by guiding them through the complex NCAA, NAIA, and junior college rules as they pursue their academic degree.
Welcome to another episode of the Baseball Awakening Podcast, where we dive into the raw, unfiltered, unsexy side of player development. Get ready for some knowledge bombs with your host, Geoff Rottmayer.
Welcome to the Baseball Awakening Podcast. I'm Geoff Rottmayer, and today we sit down with Rick Allen of Informed Athlete. That's informedathlete.com. Rick, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Jeff. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Listen, Rick, I'm excited to have you on. You know, I want to talk about your business, Informed Athletes, and I've been following your stuff for four or 5 years now. And this is where you educate parents and players on numerous of topics such as recruiting, transferring, eligibility, scholarship, just to name a few. And I really want to get into all of that, but let's just kind of start with how and why you started Informed Athlete.
Sure, absolutely. So my background, Jeff, is I was an NCAA compliance coordinator at a couple of major D1 universities, being responsible for all the NCAA rules for the coaches and the athletes at those universities. And then our son went through the recruiting process as a high school baseball player, ended up getting recruited to play Division I baseball. And actually, my wife suggested to me, she said, you know, when we're at our son's games, you get a lot of questions in the stands, in the parking lot from other parents and so forth. You should start a service providing that information to folks.
Nice.
And so it was actually her idea. And it started as kind of a nights and weekend type thing. And now it's developed to where it's our full-time business.
Awesome, man. And you know, there's a huge need for what you do and the information that you have to share. So since this show is kind of geared more toward the baseball crowd, let's start with the recruiting side of things. In your experience, what are some of the things that you're seeing that parents and players are failing to understand when it comes to the college recruiting process? You know, something that could save them time, frustration, and money.
Well, the recruiting I don't know if we can save them much time because
Right.
Certainly it takes time to be involved in the recruiting process and so forth. But as far as saving them money, my personal opinion is I'm not a fan of these recruiting services that say, you know, they can help athletes get recruited or help athletes get more opportunities and so forth. Now, I have talked to parents who have had success with them and have been happy with using those recruiting services. But personally, I don't think it's necessary if they've got, you know, if the athletes and the parents have people that will, you know, if they will invest a little of their own time in it, and if they have people that will be helpful, such as yourself, you know, such as training facilities, high school coaches, travel ball coaches, etc. If as long as parents are willing to invest some time and have additional people that will help them out, I'm not a fan of the recruiting services, but in fairness to them, I have talked to, you know, parents who have had good success. You know, maybe both parents work stressful, long hour jobs and don't have the time to get involved in helping their kids with athletic resumes, putting videos together, that sort of thing. So that's one point I would make. Another point I would share, Geoff, is, and I'd be interested in your take on it, but I think in general, and there's exceptions to almost every rule, but
Sure.
I think in general, athletes are going to have more success if they go where a coach is willing to invest a scholarship in them. You know, I hear quite often from athletes or their parents when they contact us to say, you know, hey, our son needs to transfer. You know, he's not getting much playing time, or he's been told that his scholarship may be cut. We hear from them, and I often hear them say, well, you know, our son went there as a walk-on because this was his dream school. But the coach wasn't willing to invest a scholarship in them. And in some cases, the coaches didn't even actively recruit them. And so I just think it's probably, in most cases, it's best to go certainly where the athlete is really wanted, even if that's a D2 school as compared to, you know, the athlete's goal of getting to a D1 opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the culture kind of lead people towards their dream school, and having this D1 or nothing mentality, you know, then when really there's a lot of junior colleges, D2 and D3 programs that can compete on the same field as some of the D1 programs. You know, the D1, they tend to have a little more depth. But as far as being able to compete and play, you know, you're right, Rick. You know, you want to go somewhere where they want you. So,
Yeah.
So anyway, you said a few things that I want to kind of touch on. It is a lot of work and a lot of time put into the recruiting process, and we can save a lot of time by focusing on the right stuff that takes time, if that makes sense.
Right.
You know, so let's talk about what are the things that I want to invest my time on, and what's worth it versus what I shouldn't.
Well, I think first of all, you know, encouraging the athletes to take care of their academics, and I'm sure you do that all the time, Geoff.
Yep.
But certainly encouraging them to do as best they can academically, because you know as well as I do, and most parents know, if a coach is looking at two players who have basically the same skill set, play the same positions, if everything else is pretty much equal, that coach is going to be more interested in the athlete that's got the higher academic profile.
Sure.
So that would certainly be the first one. And then the second one would be, I think, just, you know, trying to have a family discussion of, you know, what kind of, do we want to put, you know, limitations or boundaries, so to speak, on, you know, what we're looking at. You know, if a athlete is from, say, the Midwest and they want to stay relatively close to home to play, you know, does it really make sense to them to go to a showcase event out in Arizona or out in California? Now, certainly events like, you know, the baseball game, the perfect game showcases and so forth are fun to go to, and athletes can get a lot of exposure at those. But I guess just, you know, kind of setting some parameters on, you know, what's our target area geographically, what's our target in terms of the types of schools that we're interested in, and so forth.
Yeah, I agree. You know, that's something that a lot of kids kind of blow off, you know, so you've got to sit down and understand, you know, what are the criteria in which you would want to go spend the next 4 years or the next 2 years or whatever it is, you know. So like, let's just say if you're not a city guy, then it doesn't make sense for you to go to a school that's in the city. It's just not the right fit. So sitting down and assessing
Yeah.
and understanding where you want to go and where you don't want to go is going to be a pretty important part of this process. So, Rick, can you talk a little bit about because a lot of parents don't understand that there's just not a lot of money in baseball. So, can you talk about that? How much money is in baseball, and what does that mean?
Great point. So, at the Division I level, and I know you know this, Geoff, and probably a good number of the parents do, but at the Division I level, baseball teams are limited to no more. They can award no more than 11.7 total scholarships, and baseball scholarships are what is called by the NCAA. They're called an equivalency sport because your scholarships are divided up among multiple players. D1 programs can award scholarships to no more than 27 players, so they can provide 11.7 total scholarships in equivalency to up to 27 guys that, when all totaled together, total the equivalent 11.7 scholarships. So at the Division I level, there's going to be a maximum of 27 guys on a roster that get a baseball scholarship. Some programs only give 24, 25. A lot of the smaller D1s aren't fully funded. They don't have the budgets to provide the full allotment of 11.7 scholarships. At the Division II level, the number of scholarships is less. And I think right off the top of my head, I think it's 9. I don't remember exactly right at this moment. But the bottom line is, when you look at rosters and so we already talked a bit about Division I. Division II, if you're looking at a roster of, say, 40 guys, perhaps only 20 or maybe fewer are going to have a scholarship. So, and again, a lot of D2 programs not fully funded. They can't award the 9 scholarships that they're allowed to give out. So there's a lot of walk-on positions out there. And, if I go back to what I mentioned earlier, where it's probably better to go where a coach is willing to invest a scholarship in you, well, a lot of coaches don't have the budget or the availability to invest a scholarship in a guy. So, again, back to that, go where you're wanted, go where they're recruiting you hard. If they don't have money to invest in you, are they investing time in recruiting you? Are they calling you or texting you on a fairly regular basis? Are they coming to see your games? Are they, wanting updates on how you're doing and so forth?
That's a lot of great points, and I want to dive into a couple of them. Let's start with this. How would a kid, a lot of kids, they just don't ask the right question. So how would a kid start a conversation to understand, am I being recruited? And if I'm being considered for a scholarship, how did the player ask the coach that?
I think you wait and see, are they inviting the athlete to visit campus? And by that, not just to come to a camp, not just to participate in a camp, but are they inviting you to come visit campus on a weekend, to come and, take in the campus atmosphere and go maybe to a Saturday football game in the fall, or to come to campus in the winter and take in a basketball game, to see the energy on campus around a home basketball game? that sort of thing. So I think, first of all, you need to kind of judge how much interest are how much interest are the coaches showing in your son. And then if they are showing significant interest, coming to see your games, inviting you to campus, then waiting until that point and then asking, hey, I appreciate your interest in me or in our son. We're very interested in your program. Are you able to offer a scholarship? And if so, how much? We just kind of want to, start getting our thoughts together and putting a list together of what college is going to cost us as a family, etc.
Yeah, that's a good point. You got to be recruited first. Now it seems like the programs they're buying email lists, and everyone's invited to this camp or this showcase regardless of their skill set. And a lot of kids they think that this means that they're being recruited by the program. And so what happens is they end up going and they spend all this money and it ends up not being what they expected. So the emails and the letters that they're getting for attending camp to showcases, I would tell guys, and maybe you can add to this, I would tell guys to respond to those letters and ask these coaches, ask them and see where you fit on their recruiting list.
I think that's a really good suggestion, Geoff, because, many of those camps, and not to necessarily, speak negatively about camps and say you shouldn't go to them at all.
Sure.
But a lot of those camps, the primary purpose is for those assistant coaches or the graduate assistants to make some extra money from the fees that players pay to go to those summer camps. So, going to some summer camps can be good, but I think be selective about those. Don't go to one if that's not a school you would seriously consider attending. Why would you do that if that's not a school you're actually interested in attending? Right. Unless they can tell you that there's going to be coaches from other area universities participating in that camp, and where you might have an opportunity to be seen by coaches from, say, 5 or 6 or 7 other universities from that area. For example, if you were invited to a camp over in the Oklahoma City area, well, is it only going to be OU coaches that are there, or might they also have coaches there from Southern Nazarene, UCO, Oklahoma Christian, etc.?
Right. And that's the other thing that I tell kids, it depends on the objective. If you're wanting to go there and learn some stuff, then that's great. And that's different than hoping to grab the attention of a college coach.
Right. Totally agree. And another good question, Geoff, might be, who are the actual camp instructors going to be?
Yeah.
For example, I think it's probably pretty accurate that at a lot of major D1 universities at their camps, these guys probably are not going to see the head coach much at all. The instruction is going to be the assistant coaches, the graduate assistants, maybe even some of the current players. Maybe if there's a pitcher who's resting for the summer, not playing summer ball, if he's on campus, he may be assisting a little bit. But they're not gonna be seen by the head coach at a lot of those Division I camps.
True. Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. About the academic side of things. For the kids that decide to slack off their first 2 years and then all of a sudden decide to get serious, or vice versa, they do really well their first 2 years and slack off the last 2 years. So talk a little bit about why it's important as far as the transcript are concerned to show that you have been putting some consistent effort into your education.
Well, first of all, if we, and by the way, I might add here, Geoff, before I get into detail, the academic requirements for NCAA Division I, Division II, NAIA are all slightly different. But in my example, I'll focus on NCAA Division I, because if an athlete strives for and can make sure they're eligible for D1, they're almost certainly going to also be eligible for D2 and NAIA and so forth.
Right.
So for NCAA D1, it's important for the athletes to certainly be taking the right courses and doing their best in those courses, if not right away as a freshman, by the start of their sophomore year. And that's because for Division I eligibility, there's a total of 16 core courses required for NCAA Division I eligibility in your typical college prep type courses of English, math, science, history, etc. For an athlete to be fully eligible for Division I, by the end of their junior year of high school, the athlete must have earned or completed at least 10 of those 16 core courses, and at least 7 have to be in the categories of English, math, or natural science. So obviously the majority of high school athletes are going to have more than 10 core courses by the end of their junior year, because that would leave 6 for the senior year, which is a very heavy load.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why the NCAA put that rule in place. So, you've got to be starting early, or you're going to be too far behind to be able to catch up. And then a point I want to add that we've had a couple of calls from clients lately is you've got to make sure that the courses you're taking are approved for NCAA eligibility, especially if you're taking online courses. We've recently been contacted by 2 families where they have just now found out in the athlete's senior year that some of the courses they've been taking aren't acceptable for NCAA eligibility.
That sucks.
It definitely does. It definitely does. Now, in one case, the family we just spoke to, this athlete will be able to catch up and remedy his situation. But in the other case, unfortunately, this athlete was taking a lot of online courses, and it's too late. I mean, there's no way in the second semester of senior year that athlete is going to be able to be D1 eligible. So, that's why that's very important to be on top of that early on.
Yeah, so let's just say I'm a guy that can throw, 93. I'm a pitcher. I'm a stud. The school wants me, but I can't get in academically. So can you tell for our listeners to understand, can a coach override admissions?
You mean as far as can the coach help the athlete get admitted into the university?
Correct.
So the coach as an individual, the coach himself doesn't have that authority, but there are universities, many universities across the country, where the admissions office and the university administration, excuse me, works with the athletic department, and they may have what I'll call slots, where they have a limited number of slots where if an athlete does not meet the admission requirements, which, by the way, are separate now from the NCAA academic requirements for playing eligibility. But what I'm talking about right now is the admission requirements for a university. Many universities and athletic departments have agreements where they may have a certain number of slots, and they can say, hey, even though this individual doesn't meet our regular normal admission requirements, we'd like to use one of our slots to help this athlete be admitted under the provisional admission requirements for our university. Does that make sense, Jeff?
Receive a Baseball Awakening decal by subscribing on iTunes and leaving an objective review. To claim your decals, screenshot the review and email it to Geoff@baseballawakening.com. That's Geoff at baseballawakening.com, and we'll get that your way.
That does make sense, but for the people that are listening, don't be that guy. Make it easy for them, and you'll be able to get into their program.
Exactly. Yep. And you're exactly right, because if you're on the bubble, so to speak, and you are one of those guys that may need a slot like that, there's very limited number of those. And unless you're being very highly recruited by that program, there may not be a slot available. An athletic department as a whole, for example, might have, say, 10 slots or 12 slots, and the athletic director has to make a decision about, and he might say, okay, we're going to let football use 3 of those. We're going to let basketball use 2 of those. And then we're going to have some kind of process to divide the other 5 between the other 16 sports we have at our university.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about going out of state? A lot of parents are always surprised to hear whenever talking about going out of state, how expensive it can be. Can you talk a little bit about that for our listeners to understand?
So at a lot of, almost all public universities and colleges, they have now private universities like an Oral Roberts, tuition is going to be the same for in-state or out-of-state tuition. But for the vast majority of public universities and colleges, there's an in-state tuition rate and an out-of-state tuition rate. And even if you're getting an athletic scholarship, or even if a coach is recruiting you with an athletic scholarship, the fact that you're getting that you're an out-of-state athlete, that may mean that the impact on their 11.7 scholarships is higher for an out-of-state athlete. So that's another factor to keep in mind when coaches are looking at out-of-state athletes. They've got to kind of assess what's our scholarship impact when we look at those out-of-state tuition rates and so forth.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let's talk about what that means when a coach says, "Hey, we'll take you on as a preferred walk-on." What does that mean, and is it good or bad? Obviously it's different for everyone, but what's the general take on it?
Jeff, you've brought up one of my pet peeves.
There you go.
Preferred walk-on is a term that I really dislike coaches using that term, because the term preferred walk-on, all it means is whatever that coaching staff wants it to mean.
Yeah.
There's no specific NCAA classification for it. It doesn't mean that under NCAA procedures, it does not mean that a preferred walk-on gets more benefits or is more highly regarded than a true walk-on who just comes out for a tryout at the start of the year. It only means whatever that coaching staff wants it to mean. And so a couple of examples is at one program, being told you're a preferred walk-on might mean you are guaranteed a roster spot, and you're going to be on the 35-man roster for the whole academic year and for the spring season. Whereas at another university, the term preferred walk-on might only mean you're welcome to come to practice during the fall segment, and you don't have to go through an open tryout at the start of the school year, but there may be no assurance that you're going to have a roster spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings up a bunch of things. So if we look at baseball in terms of transferring, that number is way up there. Why do you think that is, and what does one need to understand about transferring?
Well, there are a lot of transfers among college athletes across all sports, but I think even more so in baseball. And a lot of the reason is because of this 35-man roster limit in NCAA Division I. A lot of D1 programs will have more than 35 guys on the fall practice squad. And then some of those guys are going to get cut, hopefully, at the end of the fall semester, so that they can then decide what they want to do for the spring. Do they want to try to transfer to a JUCO? Do they want to leave to drop down to a Division II or an NAIA program? Or do they just want to stay at that university for the academics, and they're going to continue working out on their own, trying to improve their skill level and perhaps try out again next fall? I think that's a large part of the reason for it. And the limited number of baseball scholarships is another reason for it. There's many circumstances and situations where Division I coaches are either not renewing scholarships for the following year or strongly encouraging guys to leave by telling them, hey, you're not going to get much playing time here. You haven't developed the way we thought you would. Lots of times coaches try to encourage players to transfer because they don't want to be perceived as the bad guy that they canceled the scholarship or did not renew the scholarship for next year.
Yeah. So can you talk about that a little bit? What do you mean? What do you mean my scholarship not guaranteed for 4 years?
Good question. So again, the rules are different between Division I, Division II, somewhat different between Division I, Division II, NAIA. Focusing again on Division I. Now, the major conferences or the Power 5 conferences, I know you've heard that term used, the Big 12, the SEC, etc. Those conferences have rules that they put in place a couple of years ago that if an athlete has a scholarship in their freshman year, that they cannot choose to not continue the scholarship for following years just because an athlete isn't developing the way the coaches thought they would. They're not producing on the field. They're not having as big an impact on the field as the coaches thought they would when they were being recruited. the Power 5 universities aren't allowed to use that reason to not renew a scholarship. They would have to have a specific reason, like the athlete went academically ineligible, or the athlete had a misconduct issue, student misconduct issue. For example, they had caught with beer in the dorm, something like that. Now, your smaller Division I programs, like an Oral Roberts, for example, or a Wichita State, that are not in a Power 5 conference, they can choose to not renew the scholarship for the following year. And the same is true at the lower levels, D2, NAIA as well. I have even talked to many parents that they said, well, during the recruiting process, the coach told us, hey, as long as you do well academically, you don't violate any team rules, you're a good representative of our program and our university, we're going to continue your scholarship for 4 years. But oftentimes that's not true. That's just a recruiting pitch that they give when they're recruiting the guys.
Yeah, it's a business, unfortunately, it's a business, and they're trying to win, and they've got to free up some spots for a guy who is perceived to be better.
Yep, and I will also just add, Jeff, even in those Power 5 conferences where, as I mentioned, they have these rules specific to them where they're not supposed to not renew a scholarship just because a guy is not being productive on the field. That I can tell you from some of the clients we've spoken with, that still doesn't stop some of these coaches from saying, hey, you know what? I can't legally take your scholarship away from you, but I can tell you that if you stay, you're probably never going to see the field. Yeah. So if you want to play, you really should transfer to another program.
So in the time of a ton of coach changes, and a kid goes to a school hoping to play for a specific coach, and he leaves, what happens there?
Now, interesting you raise that point, Jeff, because there is a possible change to the NCAA transfer rules for Division I, possibly coming down the line this summer. That may change things a bit. The proposal that may be considered and voted on is that, for example, let's say one of your guys from your facility signed with a D1 program back in November. But let's say that coach leaves for another job or is fired this summer. One of the proposed changes is that player would be able to be released from the national letter that he signed with the school in November and be allowed to sign with another school. Now, as you know, from a practical standpoint, that could be tough to do because there's not going to be many, if any, scholarships available at any other schools by the time you get to the following summer. But that is a potential rule change that may be considered this summer. Aside from that, Jeff, the change of a coach really doesn't affect anything. I have heard quite often from some of the athletes and families we speak to, they call us about our advice and guidance for a transfer, and they say, the assistant coach who was my main recruiter is no longer at that school. That is something we hear quite often.
Yeah. So
and as you can imagine, so that assistant coach was the one that evaluated that player, went to see that player, believed in that player's ability to help the program. Maybe the head coach never saw that player until he got on campus. Well, if that assistant coach now is gone to another program, that player has no support on the coaching staff.
Yeah, that's true. These coaches spend a lot of time developing these relationships, and these players get hung up on them. And then things change. It's the comfort. And like you said, guys believe in me, and no one else knows who I am. So if I'm listening to this and I'm saying, okay, this is some great information, but I'm curious about, what is the main thing? I'm a player and or a parent. What is the one thing or a couple things that I need to be on my A game with when it comes to understanding the path to college?
I would say a few of the key things are, number one, go where you're wanted. Don't just go to your dream school because that's the campus don't go there just because you grew up going with your dad to, the football games at this school starting when you were 8-10 years old. Go where you're wanted. Go where the coaches are seriously interested in you and see the value in you to help their team. And then, as we mentioned earlier, kind of set some parameters, set some guidelines of here's how we're going to look at the recruiting process. Do we want to look within a certain geographic area? What do you want to major in? Make sure that school has the program you want to major in, and make sure that you talk with the academic folks in the athletic department, the academic advisors in athletics. Can you realistically major in that degree program and be able to commit your time to your team and so forth? I think that's another key factor. And then obviously, what's the out-of-pocket cost of the family? You may be getting a 50% baseball scholarship at a university, but because of the cost of that university, your out-of-pocket cost of the family might still be more than a school that's only offering you a 25% baseball scholarship.
Yeah, I had an issue whenever I was in school. The academic advisor got my courses all wrong. So how did the guy, especially one, who might end up transferring from JUCO or from another school, how does one know how to stay on top of their courses?
Oh, that's a really good question, Geoff. So my suggestion and advice would be to, you need to take the advice of or at least consider the advice of the academic support staff within the athletic department, because they're the ones that you're going to have probably the bulk of your face-to-face contact with, and they're the ones that are going to be interacting and communicating directly with your coaching staff. But in addition to that, compare and periodically double check what you're being told there with the academic advisor in your department on campus. For example, if you're pursuing a degree in business administration, double check with the academic advisor in the College of Business. Double check with the advisor in the Department of History if you're going to be a history major or a political science major. I think that's important to do. Most of the time, the academic advisors in the athletic department are going to be pretty knowledgeable, or should be, about the academic programs at your university. But my one bit of advice would be to double check that information with the folks in your college, especially if your academic advisor is fairly new to that university.
Yeah.
They may have been in college athletics for 10, 12 years, but maybe not at that university. Maybe they're a new hire to that university, and they don't know the ins and outs of the degree plans at that school. So that's another thing to consider.
Yeah, I think that's great advice because, man, I went through that and man, it was a mess. I had to overload one semester on some classes, and it was just hard to manage, with the practice and the weightlifting and just being able to play games.
Well, and one thing I think they've changed, Jeff, since your playing days is NCAA now has rules where you have. It used to be years ago that hey, I'm not trying to make you sound old, Jeff.
I am. I'm getting there.
It used to be a number of years ago that players, especially baseball guys, who, as you play the spring season, and then you would go off and play in the summer, and then guys would come back in the fall, and you're cramming hours into the fall to make sure you're eligible for the upcoming spring. NCAA put in rules to where athletes have to make more consistent semester by semester progress academically. They don't allow a setup where you can just skate during the spring and the summer and then load up in the fall. They've kind of taken that away. You have to have more consistent progress throughout your college career.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in baseball, you can have, let's say you get drafted. Can you talk a little bit about these guys, these type of guys who are exploring the option of, going the professional route versus the scholarship offer? Have you dealt with that at all?
We have dealt with that somewhat. Two bits of information there. So number one, families that find themselves in that situation could certainly call us, and we could talk to them about just now. I will say we don't have expertise in the pro side, the draft side, that sort of thing. But if they wanted to talk to us about, so we're comparing our son's scholarship offer with this potential draft coming up here in June. We can explain to them a little bit more about, okay, here's what your scholarship means. As we talked about earlier, Jeff, we can say, this is only a 1 year at a time scholarship. There's a possibility it could be canceled after year one, or if it's a true multi-year scholarship, if it's written for multiple years, we can explain that to them and so forth. So that's one bit of information I would share. The other thing I would share is that NCAA Division I changed this rule, Jeff, just about a year ago to where now, or maybe 2 years ago, to where now high school players coming out and being drafted out of high school. And I stress that because, Jeff, this rule is not available to junior college guys getting drafted. This is only for guys that are in high school getting drafted. Okay. The NCAA now does allow that athlete and that family to have an agent. They can engage an agent. They can have an agent be involved in talking with them about the pros and cons, about communicating with pro teams on their behalf. But here's the key thing to keep in mind. If that athlete does not go ahead and sign with a major league team, but instead is going to go ahead and go to college before they start at college, so by the end of the summer, they are supposed to, according to this new NCAA rule, they are supposed to take action to discontinue their relationship with that agent.
Yeah.
So they are supposed to basically disengage from working with that agent. And so if they, for example, were to get drafted, but then choose to attend Oklahoma State or Oklahoma, they are supposed to say, hey, agent, we appreciate your help as we were considering the draft. We need to disengage. We'll get back to you later on if our son looks like he's going to be drafted after his junior year.
Yeah, so can you talk about that a little bit? You said after his junior year. Can you explain that to our listeners?
So, for Major League Baseball, if an athlete goes to a 4-year college out of high school, in the vast majority of cases, that athlete can't be drafted again by Major League Baseball until after their junior year, after they've attended the 4-year college for 3 years. There are exceptions for guys that have an early birthday, but in the vast majority of cases, they can't be drafted again until after they're a junior. Now, that's only for guys that go to a 4-year college. Excuse me. Guys that go to a junior college have the opportunity to be drafted again after their freshman year, or again after their sophomore year. But as I mentioned earlier, those guys can have an agent, because that rule I mentioned is only available for kids coming directly out of high school.
Yeah, that's important for them to understand, and they're always kind of surprised to hear that.
Yeah.
So Rick, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. You shared a lot of great information, and you have a lot more to offer, and you can get really specific with people. So, if someone's listening to this and they want to connect with you and see what you're all about, what's the best way for them to do that?
So, Geoff, they can contact us. Our website is informedathlete.com. And through the website, if people choose to do so, they can sign up for our free email newsletter. We send out an email newsletter each week with tips, reminders, updates on NCAA rule changes, junior college changes. They changed their rules a couple of years ago. Those types of things. Folks can sign up for our newsletters. We have a lot of blogs on our website that folks can review our blogs and may be able to pick up some helpful info there. And if they want to directly communicate with us and perhaps engage us in a consultation call, my email is rick@informedathlete.com, or our phone number is area code 913-766-1235.
Awesome, and I would second that. The blog is a great resource. Rick got a tremendous amount of information on his website that can help you guide through some of the processes. And better yet, it's better to pick up the phone and talk to Rick directly. Well, Rick,
hey, Geoff, can I add one last
Absolutely.
bit of advice
Absolutely.
for folks that may be listening? Because we've encountered a few bad or rough situations with kids recently. If an athlete is going to go as a walk-on to a program, whether that's from high school into a program as a walk-on the fall of their freshman year, or if they're transferring from junior college to a 4-year program as a walk-on, especially if they've not been actively or heavily recruited by the coaching staff at that school, Geoff, if they are, kind of a non-recruited walk-on or not highly recruited, one bit of advice I want to share, and again, folks can always contact us for more details, but make sure, as much as possible, try to make sure before classes start at a university in the fall, ask the compliance office at that school, have you met all the academic requirements to be eligible to compete that season? Can they assure you that they have looked at your transcript, they've assessed your transcript and your eligibility, and can tell you that you will be eligible to compete? Geoff, it seems almost every year in the fall, maybe late August, early September, 2 or 3 weeks after classes have started, we get inquiries from athletes and families who tell us, our son or our athlete was just informed that they're not going to be eligible this year. The school finally got around to checking their transcript, determined they didn't have enough credit hours, and they're not eligible this year. And they're already 3 weeks into the semester at that school. They can't choose to go instead to maybe go to a junior college or return back to that junior college for another semester. So that's one bit of advice I just wanted to share.
Yeah, and it's probably not a bad idea to get a third party to help you with that.
Absolutely, and we can certainly do that.
Yep.
We, one of the services we offer is a transcript review for either athletes in high school or athletes in junior college. We can review their transcripts, and we can give them a pretty good indication of whether they're on track to be eligible or whether they need additional coursework, if they need to raise their GPA, etc.
Yeah, so the people that are listening, that stuff matters. Be proactive on that front and make sure that your son can play, because like Rick said, you're going to get in about 3 weeks, then you're not going to be able to play.
Yeah.
Well, Rick, sir, I really appreciate you coming on. I really learned a lot. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity and have enjoyed talking to you.
I'm Geoff Rottmayer, and thank you for listening to our conversation on the Baseball Awakening podcast. We'll catch you next week.